speaker is former state representative, state senator, and she was going to correct me, and newly announced CEO of the Potts Family Foundation, AJ Griffin. Come on up.
Thank you all for letting me be here today. Thanks, Andy. When Andy asks you to do something, you usually say yes. At least I do, anyway. So thank you for the opportunity. And I do want to acknowledge, I think I have two of my colleagues. Well, kind of. I don't know. Fugate, did we ever serve together? We didn't overlap, but I consider you a colleague. Representative Fugate and Representative Dolan's both in here. There's a thing when you're in office that happens, you get acknowledged like that. Guess what, guys? When you're out, it stops. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody says, would all the former members of the legislature please stand? It just doesn't happen. But I do have the very best title in all of the political arena, and that is the former title. I embrace it. I think my vanity's plate on my car should say former, because I'm very happy to have served, but really glad that it's over. That part of it's over, but in that capacity. Service never finishes. When Andy asked me to come, and I looked at the layout and the format for this couple of days where you all are going to invest your time to try to get better at making change. I assume that's why you're all here, right? Okay, so everybody do something for me real quick. If you would take your right arm and put it straight in the air. Now bend at the elbow and pat yourself on the back. Okay? Because the first step to making change is showing up. I think the comments I'm going to have piggyback on what Dr. Stacy said really, really well. Because one of them, I heard her say, you can't just throw rocks. And so my experience hopefully will help you be the kind of advocate that isn't just throwing rocks. Because as those of us that are continually trying to make change in our community, and when I say community, I think of this nation as our community too. This whole 6 degrees of separation thing is real. My husband and I just got back from a vacation to Greece, and we were hiking between 2 villages on the island of Santorini, and my husband had on a Pistol Pete t-shirt because he wears a lot of OSU stuff, and he hears, "Go Pokes!" It's a kid from Edmond that had gotten off a cruise ship and was hiking on this path at the same time we were. So the community is the whole world. And I think what Dr. Stacy just mentioned with the power of a hashtag, we are definitely living in a world community. So as you try to make change, that's something to definitely remember. So I spent a lot of time reading and listening to podcasts and listening to books to try to hone my skills as I don't ever want to be a know-it-all, I want to be a learn-it-all. Dr. Stacy also talked about dissertations, and everybody has used the word agency, building agency. I turned in about 70 pages last night at about 10 o'clock, and I think I've typed the word agency 100,000 times. My study is on the great work at Remerge and building agency in those participations. So I digress. I'm also a little bleary-eyed. But I looked to one of the recent books that I've read called The Bill of Obligations by Richard Haas. And like any good politician, I don't necessarily have great ideas, but I'm really good at stealing others. And I do say politicians fall into 2 categories. And I'm going to brag on my 2 colleagues that are in the room. These 2 guys are policymakers. There are politicians and there are policymakers. And I evaluate all of them, and I remember telling a freshman member of the legislature last year, I go, I think you're going to be a policymaker. And there is a distinct difference between the 2. And most of the solutions are created by the policymakers, and most of the problems are made by the politicians. And so if you remember that politicians and policymakers come of both sides and down the middle, you can have both of both kinds. So when evaluating the work someone's doing, focus on the policy, listen to the words that they say. If they talk about themselves and their name recognition and their next office, that's a politician. If they talk about the change that they've created by moving around words on a piece of paper, because that's all they do. They move around words on a piece of paper and they take the numbers and they mix those up. That's it. No real work happens at 23rd and Lincoln. It doesn't. Like, literally. I mean, it's kind of like posters. I'm gonna make a joke here. The only poster I'm aware of that's ever changed lives was Farrah Fawcett. Because Farrah has changed some young men's lives, I have a feeling. But anyway, I digress. So let's talk about the Bill of Obligations. You guys are here to stay informed, so we can check this one off. If you don't know what you're talking about, stop talking. Seriously. And elected officials, if you don't know what you're talking about, stop talking. Learn, dig in, be the expert. Okay? Sherry is an expert on early childhood. She's my colleague at Potts Family Foundation. And I know if I have an issue, when I was an elected official, if Sherry Fair came to my door, she was there to talk about young children and making change. She was the expert. I was the novice, kind of. I knew a little bit about it, but if someone came and they were a wheat farmer and they wanted to talk to me about ag, I shut up and listen. You've got to stay informed, but stay in your lane. Get involved, check. Stay open to compromise. We are struggling as a society with this one right now. Compromise is not a 4-letter word. In fact, it's a really long word. Stay open to compromise. Anytime you're trying to make change, if you dig in your heels and say, only this way, you're going to lose. Anybody ever raised a toddler? Okay. Think about it. Toddlers fling themselves to the ground, yell, scream, cry, kick. They don't always get what they want, even with that behavior. And we see a lot of toddler-like behavior right now, and it's usually from individuals that have hunkered down and they're unwilling to compromise. That one goes with the last one. Stay informed. If you are unwilling to compromise, you're probably also unwilling to learn, because there is not one right way to do anything. Remain civil. Okay. Dr. Stacy said, you can't just throw rocks. So I'm going to borrow from her. This is Civics Con. If you look at the root of civics and civil, these are these words that go together. They are derived from the same source. They mean the same thing. Okay. Anger, trust me, I used to go in my office and yell and scream, and I learned to cuss at the Oklahoma State Capitol. And I was not alone. We had to decompress. That is fine. But what I'm going to say is that all of this builds on each other. These Bill of Obligations it requires us to be civil. And it's not always easy, but it's always right, which means you have to reject violence. I contend that right now, most of the violence that occurs in our society is verbal violence. Dr. Stacy did a great job talking about activism and those icons. Dr. King's messages still ring true today. But violence, including verbal violence, and there's a difference between being violent with your language. I will say, I would go in my office and cuss and yell and scream, but that was private behavior. The public behavior requires civility, requires us to reject violence, because violent acts are disrespectful. Violent words are disrespectful. And if we're open to compromise and we're willing to learn, then we're going to reject violence. All builds on itself. Value the norms. This one can be kind of hard too. How do you value a norm while you're trying to change it? But by valuing our institutions, Dr. Stacy just said also, you can't just throw rocks, you have to infiltrate. Okay? There are certain decorums and traditions that if you're trying to change the world, you've got to infiltrate those. Now, there are some that are just stupid. The stupid ones, ignore. But things that our society expects of us are important. And I'm going to use an example. One of the most important pieces of legislation I worked on was with my friend and colleague, Jason Nelson. We ran a piece of legislation requiring insurance providers to provide medically necessary treatments for children with autism. So in the state of Oklahoma, we were one of the states that did not require those providers to provide that coverage. And as a result, we did not have a network of providers for kids with autism. We didn't have behavioral analysts, which was a very important piece of treating kids with autism. Needed the pay source so that we would create the network of providers, and it has happened. We had as our assistants, and Jason and I were like, this is going to take 5 years, we're going to have to work on this forever. First legislative session, we filed a bill, insurance providers bring out their high-paid lobbyists. Several of my colleagues in the House and Senate who happen to be insurance agents were adamantly opposed because it was going to cost everybody too much money. But we had, that came along beside us, this group of parents who came to the Capitol dressed like they belonged in the building, who conducted themselves with poise and grace, but they were tenacious in their efforts during this session. So instead of 5 years, we passed the legislation in 1 year. Okay? Now, it had limits and things like that. But I get no credit for that because I didn't do it. Those parents did that. They valued the norm of the activity at the state capitol. And I 100% learned so much that day. It was not about matching t-shirts and chants in the rotunda. They showed up like they belonged there and like they were the expert on the issue and demanded everyone listen to them. Now the cool part of that is we passed a piece of legislation that had some pretty serious limits on it. This past legislative session, these two guys and the rest of the members in the insurance omnibus bill lifted all those caps. So in 6 short years, we went from it being a fight to it just happened. That's the other, it goes back to be willing to compromise. If Representative Nelson and I said, no, no caps, it has to be this way, then we wouldn't have the environment that we have today for kids with autism in the state of Oklahoma. So another lesson there. But those parents, they did that. They did it. They were tenacious, they were appropriate, they valued the norms of the institution, they were willing to compromise. They did all of those things right. Promote the common good. One thing I hope that advocates understand is, yes, you're in competition sometimes with the other issues, but you're all also working on the same thing, and that's trying to make a better Oklahoma, or a better Oklahoma City, or a better United States of America. And the way I look at it this way is everybody is pulling on a strand. But if you take all those strands and you put them together and you create a rope, and you're all pulling on the same rope, you can get a lot more done. So promote the common good. If I love working in the early childhood arena now at POTS because I literally can make any policy area pertinent to young children. I can. Sidewalks, I'm going to preach sidewalks all day, every day, because if you care a lot about little ones, you want sidewalks. Okay. Oh, clean energy, yep, it has a little bit to do with young children. Let's see, healthcare, yeah, a lot to do with young children. Education policy, yeah, like, oh, but they're not little anymore. Guess what? It doesn't take very long to get from a senior year in high school to be a parent, right? And I care about young children. I want the next generation of parents to have economic prosperity. Oh, we need to invest in, what's another one? Oh, economic development. Yep, very best thing for young children is mom and dad that have stable jobs that provide them a living wage, right? Maternity leave, young children. I mean, I make anything about little kids. Promote the common good, where all strands should be pulling on the same rope. Respect government service. This one can kind of be hard. We watch politicians and policymakers and we watch their behaviors, and There are a few people that run for office solely for their own personal issues. Most don't do it for that. It's hard work. You don't get paid much money. Yeah, you get a parking spot for a little while. It doesn't last forever. Yeah, I go to the Capitol now. Nobody knows who I am. I've been up 5, 6 years. You've got to respect those that are willing to put their name on a line, knock doors, and get elected. Even if you disagree with everything they say, everything they stand for. Trust me, I have names. Okay? Some of them wind up in, no, I'm not going to say that. But you've got to respect the willingness to run for an office, especially offices like city council, school board. There is no power or necessarily any real prestige in those. I mean, in big cities, yeah, but across, there are 500 and some odd cities and towns in the state of Oklahoma, and they all have city council members and things. Respect the willingness to do it, and respect them while they're there. The protocol that is associated with public service is important. It really is. And I'm going to call those guys Andy and Mickey, probably. But also, respecting the office and the willingness to serve is important. And successful advocates do that. They will respect the willingness to serve. Even if it's some goofy sucker that never says anything you like. There's a few of those. Support the teaching of civics. Okay, obviously we're all here. We're going to do that. Put country first. Oh, this one gives everybody a little bit of pause too. Now, this was the Bill of Obligations. But individuals who are upset with the way their country is behaving, conducting itself, who are willing to work to change it, I contend are the people who are putting country first. Because if it's all about you, you just sit in front of your television and gripe and complain. Because that's just you. But those that are willing to protest in the streets, to use hashtags, to show up on a Monday morning, to talk about civics, are truly the people who are putting their country first. They're putting their state first. They're putting their community first, most importantly. The country is one big community. We're putting our community first by being willing to engage. If you sit back and watch, that is not. That's just accepting things. You look at the way this country was founded, and yes, I know. The founding fathers are the most misquoted people in this country. They just make stuff up all the time. It's not exactly how that went. My favorite one was when you start talking about changing elections and they're like, well, the fathers, I'm like, yeah, it was a whole big compromise because they couldn't figure out which way to do it, so they said, let's just do it both ways. At the same time, I mean, don't get me started. But if you're willing to be an activist, you do put your country first because you care enough about it to change it, to make it better. You are putting your country first and fulfilling that obligation. So with that, I think I'm going to get us almost back on time, Andy. I'm good. I do want to see if you have any questions and then kind of set the stage for the rest of the work that you guys have for the next day and a half. Okay, I want to finish with one last story. Okay. Part of the reason why public service matters is the relationship that you create. Tomorrow afternoon, I will attend the funeral of one of my favorite constituents. I got to serve some really, really cool communities in Oklahoma when I was a member of the Senate. It was one of the very first people who said, I like you, you're going to be part of this town. It's the community of Tennessee, Oklahoma. And what Joe taught me about serving others, I see reiterated in the work I'm doing on my dissertation right now. Change happens at the relationship level. change happens at the relationship level. When you create a relationship with an elected official, with a neighbor, with a colleague, that's where we create change. You have the opportunity over the rest of this day and tomorrow to develop relationships that will create change. So don't just stay at the table with people that you know, and we'll go to listen to the speakers that you're familiar with. Work really hard to make new connections with the people that also want to fulfill their bill of obligations to our country by showing up and making that connection so that we can build a better community that we call the United States of America. Thanks, you guys.